Before a system collapses, it doesn't explode. It leaks. Not in one headline, in a thousand little, how is this still happening moments that you're expected to shrug off and keep paying for. And if you want the cleanest real world case study of that slow leak turning into a flood, you don't have to look overseas. You look right here. California, right now, today. This is the state that sells itself as the modern miracle, innovation, sunshine, the fifth largest economy on earth, the place where the future is supposed to be manufactured. And yet, the average Californian feels like they're living inside a rigged arcade game. Prices go up, services go down, and the only thing that never misses a meal is the tax collector. Here's the point I want you to lock in before we go any deeper. California doesn't have a money problem. California has an oversight problem and a leadership problem. Because when a state takes in world-class revenue but delivers third world dysfunction, you're not looking at bad luck. You're looking at incentives. You're looking at a political class that learned it can spin big, fail big, and still get rewarded because the consequences get pushed onto you. Higher taxes, higher fees, higher cost of living, and lower expectations. Let's talk budget reality for a second, because the numbers matter. California has been riding a roller coaster of boom and bust revenue, and the last couple of years have brought big deficits and big creative accounting fixes. One year, it's tens of billions shortfall. In the next year, it's cuts, delays, fund shifts, and press conferences about balancing the budget. And if you're a normal person watching from the outside, it feels like this. The state is always broke, but it's never short on money for whatever political priority is trending this week. Many cite roughly $40 billion unaccounted for. Let's ground this in what's documented, because this is where California stops being mismanaged and starts looking structurally negligent. During the pandemic, California's unemployment system turned into an all-you-can-eat buffet for criminals. The California State Auditor reported that the Employment Development Department paid out billions of dollars in fraudulent unemployment benefits, with estimates in the tens of billions. And a U.S. House Oversight report cited ranges that reach into the low 30 billions of dollars. Whether you call it 20 billion, 30 billion, or somewhere in the neighborhood, here's the point. This wasn't petty fraud. This was industrial-scale looting. And it happened because the guardrails weren't just weak. They were basically decorative. And if you think that was a one-off, it wasn't. Because California has another where did the money go problem that should make every taxpayer's blood pressure spike. Homelessness. Not just the tragedy, the spending. California has poured staggering amounts of money into homelessness programs, and the state auditor found the state couldn't even clearly track the total spent across major programs or consistently measure outcomes. One audit cited roughly $24 billion allocated over a 5-year period and concluded the state lacked a centralized way to track spending and effectiveness. Think about how insane that is. If you own a small business and you can't account for where your money went, you don't get a press conference. You get an audit, a bank call, and maybe a visit from someone with a badge. But when the state can't track billions of dollars, they call it complex. They blame coordination challenges, and they ask for another budget increase. That's not complexity, that's permission. And here's the part the political class hates hearing out loud. Oversight isn't red tape. Oversight is the only thing separating public programs from organized crime. When oversight dies, 2 things happen every single time. Number 1, the honest people get slower because they're trying to do it right. Number 2, the dishonest people get richer because nobody's stopping them. So while Sacramento argues about narratives and slogans, regular Californians are watching the tangible results. More encampments, more open-air drug use, more petty crime that never gets meaningfully addressed, more families leaving because they can't afford to stay, and a public that's being told repeatedly that the problem isn't policy, it's just complicated. No, the math is not complicated. California has the highest state income tax bracket in the country and layers of fees that function like stealth taxes. You pay at the pump, you pay on your utility bill, you pay at the register, you pay on your property, you pay through inflation, you pay through insurance premiums that climb as risk climbs. And then you pay again through the loss of services you thought your taxes were buying. And we're not talking about abstract harm. We're talking about human bodies. California has been getting crushed by the fentanyl wave, and 2023 saw thousands of overdose deaths tied to fentanyl in the state. So when you watch leadership pat itself on the back while the street reality gets uglier, people don't just get frustrated, they get suspicious. Because citizens can tell when they're being managed instead of served. Here's the hard truth. A state that can't track billions of dollars, can't prevent mass fraud, and can't deliver basic order doesn't get to keep preaching to you about compassion while your neighborhood deteriorates. Compassion without competence is just a brand, and California right now is running like a brand. So this isn't a California is doomed rant. It's a warning, and it's a choice. Because if we don't name what's happening, we normalize it. And once you normalize dysfunction, you guarantee more of it. California didn't become this overnight. It became this because too many leaders learned they could fail upward, and too many voters were trained to expect less. And that brings us to the next question that matters. If the state can lose track of tens of billions and criminals can walk off with unemployment money like it's a free sample table, what else is leaking right now that nobody else wants to talk about? Because once you accept that the problem is structural, you start seeing the pattern everywhere. California's failures don't happen because government is hard. They happen because accountability is optional, and optional accountability always produces the same outcome: waste, fraud, and a culture of no consequences. Let's start with the unemployment fraud again, because it's the purest example of what happens when a massive system meets low standards. The state auditor's work on EDD described control failures that made fraud easier than prevention: identity verification gaps, weak safeguards, delayed fixes, and billions paid out that never should have left the building. That's not an opinion. That's the state's own oversight saying, in polite language, this was a disaster. Now ask the obvious follow-up. If California couldn't secure unemployment benefits during a crisis, why should you assume it secures anything else well during normal times? And that's why homelessness spending is such a gut punch. Because homelessness is the one issue where leaders constantly demand more money and then act offended when the public asks, where's the last pile of money? The state auditor's homelessness findings were basically a flashing sign that said, we can't even clearly tally what we're spending, and we can't consistently prove what it's buying. If that doesn't trigger reform, what would? Here's what this looks like in the real world. A state creates a dozen programs, spreads responsibility across agencies, and then nobody owns the results. Everybody owns the funding, though. Everybody's happy to take a slice. And when the outcomes are ugly, the answer is never, we built this wrong. The answer is, we need more funding. This is where the sarcasm is earned. California is the only place where failure is treated like a growth strategy. Now, let's talk about the other black hole that keeps eating credibility: infrastructure promises. California's high-speed rail is the perfect symbol of our era. Grand vision, endless spending, shifting timelines, and a price tag that grows like it's on performance-enhancing drugs. Recent reporting has put the projected cost in the neighborhood of roughly $88 billion to as high as $128 billion. While the project continues to face funding gaps and schedule uncertainty. And here's the problem. The longer this drags on, the more it trains the public to believe the state can't complete big projects without turning them into generational money pits. Now layer that on top of what Californians actually live with day to day. Roads that still feel like they were designed by a committee that hates tires. A power grid that somehow can't handle heat in a state that has had heat since the beginning of time. Water policies that swing between panic and paralysis. And mobile transportation in cities that too often feel like a mobile psychiatric ward instead of transportation. Is every one of those problems solely the governor's fault? No. California's mess is older than any single politician. But leadership sets priorities, appoints managers, defends policies, and decides whether competence is rewarded or punished. And for years, the signal from the top has been clear: narrative first, outcomes second. That's why you get reforms that sound good on paper but don't survive contact with reality. That's why you get enforcement that feels selective. That's why you get a political class that speaks in moral language while operating a machine that produces disorder. And if you want the bluntest example of disorder, look at what Californians are seeing around drugs. The fentanyl crisis didn't arrive because Californians suddenly became worse people. It arrived because markets respond to opportunity and cartels are ruthless businessmen. When enforcement is inconsistent and consequences feel theoretical, the supply expands and the body count rises. Now, if you're on the left, you'll say the answer is more treatment, more housing, more programs. If you're on the right, you'll say the answer is more enforcement, more deterrence, more consequences. Here's my position as a constitutional conservative who still lives in the real world. You don't get to pick just one. You need both, and you need them implemented by adults who can run a system without losing track of the money. Because here is what California has proven. A state can spend billions of dollars on solutions and still make the problem worse if the incentives reward spending instead of success. And here's where the tie-in matters. When tens of billions can vanish through fraud and tens of billions can be allocated without clear performance tracking, the public starts drawing the only reasonable conclusion. This isn't just incompetence. This is a system that no longer fears consequence. And notice how the messaging always works. The moment you demand proof, they accuse you of not caring. Caring is why you demand proof. Because every dollar that gets wasted or stolen is a dollar that doesn't go to the classroom, a firefighter, a shelter bed, a rehab slot that treats addiction, or a road that doesn't destroy your suspension. The poor don't get protected by sloppy programs. They get exploited by them. When oversight is weak, the people who suffer first are the people with the least cushion. So when someone tells you don't ask questions, just fund it, understand what they're really saying. Give us the money and trust us. And California has had enough, trust us, to last a lifetime. California is not broke. California is bleeding trust. And trust, once lost, is almost impossible to buy back, even with another billion-dollar program. So the real question isn't how much did we spend? The real question is who benefits when we fail? Because in a healthy system, failure triggers reform. In California's system, failure triggers more funding. Now we're going to bring it home because this is the part that really matters for your life, your family, and your future. When people hear fraud and waste, they think it's a politics problem. It's not. It's a stability problem. A state that can't guard public money can't guard public order for long, because the same culture that tolerates financial leakage eventually tolerates institutional decay. Rules become negotiable. Standards get lowered. Enforcement becomes inconsistent. And everyday people start living like the system is unreliable because it is. That's when you get the second quiet order effects nobody puts in campaign ads. Insurance leaves certain zip codes. Small businesses stop opening. Families stop letting kids ride bikes in an area that used to be fine. Working people stop believing their sacrifice is building anything because the state keeps converting sacrifice into bureaucracy. And that is exactly how a society loses cohesion. Not by one dramatic collapse, but by a million micro betrayals. Here's what a competent California would do. And none of this is radical, it's basic governance. First, treat audits like alarms, not like paperwork. When the state auditor says the state can't track billions in homelessness spending, the response shouldn't be a press statement. It should be a structural overhaul, a single public ledger, standardized reporting, outcome metrics that can't be gamed, and consequences for agencies that refuse to comply. Number 2, prosecute fraud like it's an attack on the public, because it is. If EDD fraud lands in the tens of billions, the response can't be, we'll improve identity checks next year. It has to be recover what you can, pursue the networks, ban the contractors and vendors that enabled it, and redesign the system so it can't be harvested again. Number 3, stop rewarding the aesthetics of compassion while ignoring the mechanics of competence. Real compassion is a clean sidewalk. Real compassion is a safe park. Real compassion is a school where teachers can teach and kids can learn. Real compassion is a system that protects the vulnerable without becoming a magnet for predators. Number 4, recenter the citizen. California's political culture often treats citizens like an inconvenience, like revenue with opinions. Flip that. Make public agencies justify themselves the way you have to justify yourself to your household budget. Show the receipts, show the outcomes, show the reforms, or lose the funding. And yes, that means putting blame where it belongs, because leadership is not just vibes. Leadership is results. Leadership is whether the people at the top demand performance or excuse failure. If you're asking me whether current state leadership deserves credit for this mess, my answer is simple. They've owned the steering wheel long enough to own the direction. And if you're wondering what this looks like in practice, it's simple. A state where rules are enforced unevenly becomes a state where citizens start making rational, defensive choices. They harden, they withdraw, they stop investing emotionally in a place that doesn't protect its own standards. Now, that's how you lose the middle. The normal people who aren't activists, who aren't extremists, who just want to work, raise kids, and live in peace. When those people give up, the only voices left are the loudest ones. And that's how sane governance dies. So yes, I'm putting the blame where it belongs, on the leadership culture that treats oversight like an inconvenience and criticism like a threat. California doesn't need another slogan. It needs adults who can run a ledger. Now, none of this means California can't be saved. California is still one of the most naturally wealthy regions on Earth. It has talent, industry, ports, agriculture, tech, defense infrastructure. The raw materials of success are everywhere. What's missing is disciplined governance. And disciplined governance starts with a public that stops accepting excuses. Because here's the trap. The longer a system runs on dysfunction, the more it trains people to accept dysfunction as normal. And the moment you accept it, you stop fighting it. Don't accept it. Demand the receipts, demand the audits, demand the prosecutions, demand results that match the tax burden. And if someone calls that extreme, tell them this. What's extreme is losing tens of billions to fraud. What's extreme is allocating tens of billions without being able to clearly track impact. What's extreme is watching overdose deaths climb while leadership argues about optics. What's extreme is paying elite prices for declining quality of life. That's not normal. That's failure. If you want to start small, start local. City council, DA races, school boards, bond measures, sheriff elections. That's where policy becomes reality. Sacramento follows pressure. It rarely leads it. Make your vote hurt, or they won't feel it. Now, a quick human note before I close. Part of why I write and talk about systems under stress is because stories are how people process reality. It's why I put this mindset into my thriller novel, Dead Reckoning. Not as a lecture, but as a story about what happens when institutions crack and ordinary people are forced to navigate the consequences. If you like these kinds of long-form pattern-based breakdowns, you'll recognize the same themes there, just told through characters instead of headlines. If you want more breakdowns like this, real numbers, real patterns, no sugarcoating, then do the 3 things that actually move the algorithm. Hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment down below with the single biggest California failure you want exposed next. Fraud, homelessness, spending, high-speed rail, crime, fentanyl, taxes, or something maybe I didn't mention. Then share this with one California who thinks this is just how it has to be. It doesn't. A state can be compassionate and competent. A government can serve people instead of harvesting them, but only if citizens demand it, loudly, consistently, and with zero patience for excuses. Stay sharp, stay aware, and as always, stand watch.